Heading into part 5, I'm experiencing this great ambivalence in reviewing the Grand Amato interrogation. And it comes from both poles for some reasons I'll illustrate here in a second. The first being that no one is coming out of the woodwork to support Grant or defend him or stick up for him, which is fantastic in one way, but also a little worrisome in another. It's fantastic because I don't have to deal with, like when I covered the Chris Watts crime, I would get comments that said, someone in prison with Chris Watts told him that Chris Watts didn't really do it, so you should look into that. And it wasn't even worth the 15 seconds of reading it, let alone entertaining the idea by actually looking into it. But if I were to entertain it, I would say something to the effect of, okay, so a convicted murderer who's locked away for the rest of his life for the protection of society told another convicted murderer who's locked away for the rest of his life for the protection of society that he didn't commit the crime he's being locked away for. And you believe it? This isn't a math equation where 2 negatives equals a positive. This is 2 habitual, lifelong liars who had to be locked away for all of our safety, equaling a double liar. And even if the guy in prison reporting what Chris Watts said is honest in every other way than the horrible crime he committed, he's still reporting something that was said by Chris Watts, who we have tens of hours of footage of him lying to everyone under the sun, friends, family, law enforcement. So why would you believe that? But no one's doing that for Grant. Which gets me to the worrisome part, is that I feel like no one, like with Chris Watts, a lot of people relate to him, and that's why they defend him. They feel like they're defending themselves. I don't think anyone relates to Grant because he's so pathetic, which makes me feel sorry for him, but also he did a disgusting crime, which makes me hate him. But no one defends him, no one's sticking up for him. I think it's because no one relates to him, but from where I'm sitting, he seems to represent a growing subset of the population. More and more people over the last few decades want to just sit around in a room in a puddle of their own fart juice under a blanket of potato chip crumbs and just watch videos all day, make videos all day, play video games all day, and not actually interact with people in the real world or contribute to society. And that sounds like a luxurious lifestyle. And many people are making it work for them in a valuable way, contributing to charities and making lots of money for their friends and family. But that's a small percentage of everyone who's trying to do it. And Grant falls into the vast ocean of people trying to do it and having zero success. Very few people go down the road Grant did, but I wonder how many, as this subset of the population grows, how many more are not knowing that they're going down that path until they get there, like Grant did. So this is the new world man. And I feel like people should at least recognize, like I feel sorry for the loser in his early 20s who nothing has worked out for him yet, but then I'm disgusted by the crime he committed because that wasn't the answer. And I wonder if it's just because people aren't relating to him and not recognizing some of his traits in themselves, like they did with Chris Watts. And by the way, out of the huge number of people who are not coming out to support Grant, notable on that list, Sylvie, the cam girl he paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to say nice things about him, has not shown up in the comments to defend him. And he still thinks that they had a real relationship where they've never met and she's never done anything for him. Disgusted but feel sorry. It's a strange feeling. But next, in the interrogation, we get to people who have done stuff for Grant. And we're going to see what happened to them as a result of that. Because next, like I said, Danny Anderson is, when I say that, like it's the ghosts of Grant's victims looking through the eyes of the interrogators and haunting him into being convicted of the crime, I don't just mean that as a metaphor. I also mean it literally in that Danny Anderson and Eva Malteri and even Jason later on, they are speaking for the victims. They're literally in defense of the victims. So it's not just a metaphor or a ghost story I'm trying to make up there. It's also literal. And I feel because Danny Anderson already knows what's happened. He doesn't know the exact details of the crime, but he knows that the three members of Grant's family have all been murdered, and Grant is the number one suspect. Buddy's sitting back and saying, "So, buddy, Cody, your brother, tell me about him." And this is where Grant establishes the first character of his anime, where he, now that his three victims can no longer speak for themselves, he's going to paint them in a way that he wants them to be remembered forevermore, in a way that serves his purpose after he's sucked their bodies dry. Now he's going to discard their husks into the soil and fertilize his own soil. Before we get into that, though, you may be wondering at this point why Grant hasn't asked why he's being interviewed by the police for so long. And a lot of people have pointed to the fact that that makes him look guilty, that he's just blabbering endlessly and not actually asking why he's there, being asked about his family, asked about his hobbies. And it's important to remember that an innocent man in Grant's situation could do that if everything was the same about an innocent person, except that they hadn't actually committed the murder. They could blabber endlessly in the interrogation the way Grant is and still be innocent, because we don't know that he hasn't already asked a police officer, like maybe when he was arrested, this was brought up in the trial. Maybe he was asked on the car ride over. Maybe he was asked before they handcuffed him and brought him in. And maybe they just gave him non-answers, so he knew not to ask anymore. And he was just going to cooperate. I'm not talking about Grant here. I'm talking about an innocent person in Grant's situation. And now they're being asked all these questions about their life, and they're finally getting an outlet to release all the things that have been in their head that they've wanted to talk about and had no one to talk to about. Who's he going to tell these things about? Sylvie? He's living in a fantasy world with her. So they don't talk about real world things. He just talks about how rich and successful he is, and she talks about how much she loves him and how great he is. So an innocent person with everything the same except the crime committed could be blabbering endlessly without asking why he's there. Just wanted to keep that in mind. But as we'll see, Grant is guilty, and we see that his stunted development began in high school, as far back as we can tell here, when he attached himself to his brother Cody. Because it's the way that Grant describes it. He can describe it in any way he wants to, but he says, in high school, I got to know his guy friends. And there's a couple of reasons why that's telling for Grant's emotional stunted development, because he doesn't mention any of his friends. It's not like they fought a lot as young kids, and then in high school, Grant got to know Cody's friends. But it's not like our two groups of friends came together and our girlfriends became friends with each other. It's Grant attached himself to Cody's social life. So instead of getting his own social life going and building up his own group of friends, Grant just stuck his proboscis into Cody and sucked the blood from his social life. And it's interesting also that he specifies his guy friends, no girls. He wasn't getting any action through his brother Cody's circle of friends. Or on his own, more importantly, it's not Cody's responsibility to get girlfriends for Grant. It was nice enough that Cody let Grant be the little tag-along brother who couldn't make it on his own. Because Grant has kind of, relegated himself to this position. And as he's describing this relationship as they're going from high school into college and doing all this stuff together, Anderson actually has to verify some of these details, because even though, as he'll say later, he and Malteri combined have 50 years experience, they've probably heard and seen it all, but he has to verify this because he's not sure he heard it right. He's saying, so wait, you and Cody are at the same time in the same classes. And for most of the classes, yeah, that's true. Because and Grant even has some self-awareness in that area where he says, yeah, people thought it was weird, but we were supporting each other. And that could be a healthy relationship where the two brothers or two friends, they do everything together and they support each other, and their relationship is stronger than they would be individually. But Grant was the X factor that made it not work in the end, as we'll get to, because even though he has relegated himself to the little buddy of Cody, the popular brother, he still needs to feel like his life is important in some way. He needs to feel superior in some way. So when he's talking about how they did together in nursing school, he has this line where word for word he says of Cody that he would admit that I was didactically more competent than him in that field. Exact words. Exact words. So with that kind of verbiage, he's feeling pretty good about himself, and he's enjoying placing himself above Cody, which is kind of like the tick on a dog's pelt bragging that it's bigger with blood than the dog it's attached to. You know, he rode Cody to the top and then discarded his husk. And now he's bragging about it, which is disgusting. But I also feel bad that he didn't get a life going of his own. But he's a cretin for resorting to what he did. So conflicted. But then Grant sums it all up, his portrayal of Cody. He sums it all up by saying, just from the few examples I've given you, Cody would always take care of everything for me. He would take care of it. He would always take care of it, which is the thesis statement of Cody's role in life, to take care of things for Grant. That's very important that Grant lets everyone know that Cody always took care of everything, which we'll see why when we get to it. But next, we get to Jason Amato, the oldest brother in the Amato family, who doesn't play a role in Grant's anime, but he does play a huge role in the real world story of the Amato family. Because he's described by Grant as being heavily restricted, having to do a lot of chores. He was under lock and key. He always had to finish his homework. He served a lot of punishments for, growing up, childish behavior where you had to learn the hard way. But this is a perfect example of why you should never blame the parents for what kids do. Blame parents. I see that a lot. That's the minor excuse that people do give Grant. They say it's because the parents pampered him or they gave him way too many free passes. And I don't buy that at all. I don't blame the parents in any way for Grant's decisions and choices. And Jason is a perfect example of why. Because he came up with the same parents in the same household and the same upbringing, and he moved out of the house at 18 or 19, got his own career started, has his own family going, has in no way gotten in serious trouble. And by the way, Grant's mom is Jason's mom, and Grant's dad adopted Jason. And now Jason, he took the positives from his upbringing instead of dwelling on the negatives and blaming that for his own behavior. He adopted the kids of his significant other. So he took the positives of his upbringing and he paid that forward into his own life, and he has his own successful family and career going instead of using it as an excuse. How much sense does that make to blame the parents for the kids' bad behavior? You hear that all the time with misbehaved adults. They're like, I saw my dad doing crack every day and he stabbed my mom. So you wonder why I do crack and stab people? I grew up watching that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The thing you blame all of your misery and your bad behavior on, you would go on to do that to others. Everything you hated about that, you're making other people hate that about you. That makes a lot of sense. It makes about as much sense as like a Jewish kid in Nazi Germany saying, those horrible, evil Nazis, they marched into town and took everything from us and ruined our lives and ruined our family and tore us apart, and I hate them and they're bad and they should be banished to hell forever. Oh, that's horrible. What'd you do about it? I grew up and I joined the Nazi party. Really? Good luck with those instincts. Don't blame the parents. Blame the parents for their actions, what they do to the kids. Don't blame them for what the kids do independent from the parents. And the Amato family is a perfect example of that. Jason and Cody thrived in the Amato household upbringing. And that's why I don't blame them. So, on the subject of the parents, Mom is up next in this description, and we're going to see how Grant's caricature of her compares to her true self and how that works out for Grant. But I'm getting long here, so I'll see you in part 6.